we at Bellevue University are in conversation with a number of large, very large corporate enterprises and are indeed in the implementation phase with 3 at this time. They are Verizon Wireless. This is a retail management program for their storefront operations. The Home Depot, which has 2,300 locations and is challenged to develop leaders in that pipeline, and an emerging near completion conversation with Convergys, the large call center operation out of Cincinnati Bell. And there are 4 or 5 other major corporation conversations underway about how to accelerate their leadership pipeline. And when we talk about the leadership pipeline, we're talking about the step from the individual contributor to the first managerial role. We're not in the market of competing with Duke, Harvard, and the rest of University of Pennsylvania for succession to the CEO suite. 5th piece of data has to do with available resources. Cash availability in the economy is not an issue. The world is awash in liquidity. The central banks of every nation of the world, from China to Europe to the United States, is shoveling cash into their financial institutions. Corporate balance sheets are full of cash, and I'll talk about that in a moment. There's a money supply measurement called M2. It's the amount of money, basically cash, in the US economy. This has probably changed in the last in the last probably week and a half, because the equity market has changed. Excuse me. But of this date, M2, the money supply in the US economy, was 126% of the entire market value of all the equities of all the companies in America. 126% of the value of the stock. Corporate balance sheets are abundant with cash, primarily because fear dominates our senior leader decision-making. They're uncertain about the future. So the way organizations deal with uncertainty is to build cash, because it's the asset which has the most fungibility, can be used most readily. The bad news is that the cash is not making its way to programs in learning and development. In fact, in 2008, Burson and Associates estimates that expenditures for learning and development in the US economy declined by 11 to 17%. This is empirical affirmation of what we all know, that some of the first things that get cut are travel and training. And it's happened in 2008, and the expectation is that it will happen again in 2009. This is in the face of CEOs saying talent is a challenge, that CEOs understand the demographics, believe me, as reflected in the Heidrich and Struggles commentary. In the face of those structural issues and challenges of the talent war, which is a valid conversation, organizations continue to avoid putting the cash, which is awash in the economy, it's absolutely awash, into the development of the talent that they need to run their organizations in the near future. The last fact that I want to share with you is some data from our own profession. In 2 separate surveys of learning leaders, I asked the question shown here. I would like you to reflect on the question a moment, jot down on your piece of paper in front of you, or you can just mentally keep it, either yes or no as it applies to your organization. The question is, if you were able to demonstrate measurable business impact, would your organization invest more in education and training? How many would say yes? How many would say no? That result is exactly the same result I get every time I ask this question. The number that say no is 0. The question is, if you were able to demonstrate measurable business impact, would your organization invest more in learning? education and training. This is over several hundred professionals now in our industry have asked this question. The answer is that we all say it's not no. If we could demonstrate, we would have the case for additional investment in learning and education. The conclusion is back to the same issue. It's the pogo issue. We have found the enemy, and he is us. This brings me full circle to the starting point depicted in that pogo cartoon. The only conclusion one can draw from this evidence that we have looked at here today are the following. Senior management knows that learning and development is key to competitive success in the future. I've heard conversations, well, the CEO really doesn't know how important we are. I would advance exactly the opposite conclusion. The fact that they're willing to spend 130 billion plus money without reporting is in fact evidence that they do think it's important. The Heidrick and Struggles feedback, the surveys of CEOs, they do believe what we believe, that it is important. Second summary aspect is organizations have the cash to make human capital investments. So now you have a problem that's evident from the data, and you have the resources available on a global basis, but the bottom line is the resources are not getting to where they need to be. It doesn't do any good 5 years from now when they're struggling over the limited number of people in the job market to say, gee, we had the cash 5 years ago to do something about this, but we didn't do anything about it. That's where we are. We know that those who measure have a seat at the table. The accountants and the finance managers, the only reason they have a seat at the table is not that they're better strategic thinkers. It's that they measure and keep score where the operation is, where the organization is. That's why they have a seat at the table, solely about their ability to measure and demonstrate results. And we believe we would have more resources to impact the success of our organizations through what we do in learning and development. The survey question, were we able to demonstrate the impact of the outcomes? We believe that. So, the bottom line is that we know we need to measure and report impact, yet we do not do it in a compelling fashion. Again, it's the pogo commentary. We have met the enemy, and it is us. To wind up my comments, I want to leave you with a couple of elements of advice that might help you prioritize actions when you get back home. Here are what I think are 3 key elements of measurement for you to consider. The first is to get your senior management, and whether you're profit, for-profit, or non-profit, is to get your senior management to agree on what business outcomes your learning activity is intended to impact. Let me just repeat it. Get your senior management to agree on the business outcomes that your learning and development interventions are intended to impact. The challenge here is not to represent what other organizations are doing, namely best practices. The challenge is to have the dialogue with your management and get their alignment on what is important for your organization. And let me just give you 5 examples of why it's not a single holy grail of a best practice. Here are 5 organizations I have personally been involved with on this issue of business outcomes. The first is Halliburton. This is an engineering firm in the oil patch. The 3 top priorities for that organization are employee engagement, customer satisfaction, and cash flow. I have seen no other major corporation that has made employee engagement as a strategic outcome for their activity. We talk about customer satisfaction, and we talk about it being a service-based economy. This is Halliburton, a hard-nosed, left-brain engineering company. They dig holes in the ground and support the engineering services to get the hydrocarbons to market.